My name is Katie Aquila, and I am a Reiki practitioner in Toronto. I discovered Reiki when I was going through a very stressful time in my life, and I was living abroad and working, and I decided to volunteer on the side at a yoga studio where I was working. And I discovered Reiki, which is an energy medicine, during that time of my life, and I was suffering from a lot of anxiety, and I was having issues controlling my emotions, and I realized that a lot of what was going on was my trying to control what other people were experiencing and what was going on with my job. And a big focus of Reiki as an energy therapy is kind of letting go of that control and just kind of being in the moment. And that's a theme of a lot of different kinds of energy medicine and yoga, which I also practice, is kind of just letting go and letting things flow. And a lot of that stuff is very high level, and I had a hard time connecting with a lot of it when it was being introduced to me. How do you meditate, and how do you remove yourself from these situations that you can't control? And Reiki was something that was introduced to me. The principle of it is that there's energy surrounding us, and it's all around us, and it's in every living being and every living thing. So the principle of Reiki is that you kind of open up yourself as a channel so that you can take that energy from the surrounding area and you can move it through yourself and channel it in certain directions with intention. So the principle of illness in that sense, and in the Reiki principles, is that there's a blockage of that energy. And so if you imagine it as yourself as a straw, for example, then a blockage of that energy is not allowing the liquid, the energy in this sense, to flow through that straw. And so the Reiki principle when you're getting a treatment is that you put a lot of energy through the straw at once, and that allows the blockage to pass and energy to flow. The principle of health is just flowing energy, as you can imagine it flowing all around and through space. So I'm going to guide you through a couple of different exercises that really work for me in just bringing anxiety down and realizing that control isn't necessarily what we're seeking, and more so what is going to benefit us the most is just kind of bringing us back into the moment and just centering and realizing what we can control and what we can't, and what we can is just ourselves, really. So another principle of Reiki is that we have these energy points in our body, and they're called chakras. And we deal with all of them in yoga as well, and also through meditation. And so one thing that we can do with Reiki energy is just dealing with a few of those points. And you can do this when you're on your own at home, or you can do it when you're on the bus, for example, because it's not a very invasive thing and people aren't going to look at you funny or anything like that. You can, so the three main points that I deal with when I'm doing Reiki energy and I'm trying to just center myself are the third eye chakra, which is on the forehead, and then the heart chakra, which is just in the middle of your chest. And then there's the solar plexus chakra, and there's also like the root chakra, and those are in your stomach area. So those are 3 points that you can kind of use to bring yourself down and get those points communicating. It's just kind of seeing that the energy is flowing from the top of your head and down into your body. So if you want, you can close your eyes and you just put a hand on your forehead and a hand on your heart. And you can just breathe until you kind of feel your breath going up and your chest rising and it going back down. And you'll notice eventually, if you really settle in, that there's a little bit of a pattern. You can feel your body rising and falling, and there's a bit of a flow. And once you feel like you've got that communication going, you can take the hand that's on your heart and bring it down to your stomach. And you'll notice the same thing when you're breathing really deeply, that your stomach is rising and falling, and it's bringing a sense of calm. And when you've got a sense of communication going there as well, you can take the hand that's on your forehead, on your third eye, and you can bring that down to your chest. Keep your eyes closed and just feel the rising and falling until you get a little bit of a rhythm going and make you feel calm. And that's something that you can do when you're having trouble falling asleep, or when you're feeling like you're in a high anxiety state and you don't know how to control it. Just give yourself a minute, because you can bring yourself down from whatever bridge you're on just by breathing and focusing on getting that energy flowing. I mean, Reiki is a principle. It seems like something that's so untouchable. It seems so high level, like meditation. How am I going to sit and think about nothing? It's so intangible when you're just starting out. But if you really just notice it as a pattern, just focus on the breath coming in and out of your body and holding on to those points, it's something that anybody can do. Another principle that I want to share with you is something called sacred space. And it isn't necessarily a principle of Reiki per se, as much as it's a principle of traditional medicine and indigenous medicine all over the world. I learned it during a shamanic healing workshop here in Toronto that I did. And it was a really interesting thing that's a kind of introduction to meditation, and it's just developing a space that works for you, that you can imagine and go to in your mind. And you can deal with conflict in that way. You can kind of just be in solitude. And so when I first took that course, I had just come back from Hawaii, and I was there on vacation, and it was such a beautiful time, but coming back meant that I was going back into work and trying to figure out what I wanted to do after finishing school. And so developing a sacred space in my mind and a place that I could go to was something that really allowed me to just feel safe and be in solitude and kind of work through problems just on my own without the hustle and bustle of everything that's going around in a city like Toronto. So my vision of a sacred space, and I'll go through it with you and you can develop your own, is something that made me feel like I was on my own and I was in nature and I was safe. And so for me, I was imagining being near the water, so near the sea. But in Hawaii, there's these areas of the beach that you can imagine there's all of these big trees. There's palm trees and different types of trees that are all located near the water. And they have these root formations that kind of go across, and they're really beautiful. They make these patterns that show up in the sand. And so I imagined in my sacred space a place that was surrounded by those trees, and there was a pattern of all of those roots along the floor in the sand. And I could see the water from where I was, but I was protected in this kind of haven created by the trees and the shade. And this is a place that I can go to when I'm working on meditating or working on trying to create a quiet space for myself and just be. And nobody can enter that space if I don't want them to. Nobody can bother me when I'm in there. And I can really reflect on the things that are going on in my life. The principle that we went through when I was working on that workshop was developing an altar. And I mean, it sounds religious, but it's not necessarily that way. You just put things that are important to you and that you'd like to work towards in that space. And so for me, there were a few crystals on it. I wanted to put some things like coconut oil on it, because these are things that I like to surround myself in, what make me feel good and healthy. So all of those things are in my sacred space, and they're things that I can kind of visit when I'm in there in my mind that bring me back to a calm, alert state. Another thing that we learned as far as going through and working on conflict was that you could invite people into that sacred space even if they were somebody that you weren't actually able to talk to in person. So for example, if you were having a conflict with somebody and that resulted in you not being friends anymore, you wanted to share things with them that they're circling in your mind and you can't put them down. So how are you going to share those thoughts and really get them out of your head if you can't actually have a conversation with that person? And something that we learned in that workshop was that you could invite them into your sacred space. So if you were to go into that space in your mind, you picture that safe space, whether for you it's amidst mountains or you're in a meadow, or for me on the beach, and I opened up that space to the person, and you can imagine inviting them in and sharing the things that you need to say with them and inviting them to talk back. And even the exercise of just imagining what you would want to say to them and what they would say back to you can kind of get it out of your mind, something that's been circling and not allowing you to move forward and leave that conflict behind. It just allows you to finally put it down. And even in the case that you know that person wouldn't be willing to talk, or the conflict is just too old, or there's too many emotions that are surrounding it, pack it up. When you're in your sacred space, put a box together, and all of the things that you would want to say, just lay them down inside and leave it outside of your sacred space, and allow them to come and pick it up if they want to. You are allowed to move past this, put it down, and just let it flow. Something that's been sticking with me lately is where focus goes, energy flows. So if you focus on letting it go, and you focus on moving on and just creating that sacred, safe space in your head, just putting your hands on those pressure points and allowing yourself to take the time to just breathe and let it flow, let it go, then you can move forward. And it's something that's accessible to everybody, and you deserve to have that happiness, and you deserve to let it flow.